Our next speaker, Maggie Susperegui, will be discussing a different aspect of the Inklings. She will be talking about C.S. Lewis, mainly. Maggie also graduated a couple of years ago, English Studies. She took her master's degree last year also in comparative literature. She has been doing research on C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, and she is currently working on her PhD dissertation concerning the role of mountains and subterranean spaces in Tolkien's work. But today, she will be discussing issues related to C.S. Lewis. So, Maggie, a pleasure having you, and feel free.
Thank you for your introduction. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. As Martin has already told you, I will be talking about another Inkling, who is C.S. Lewis. And, well, following this index, I will firstly introduce you the topic. Then I will give some brief information about the author, about the historical context, so that we all can understand better the way he wrote or why he did what he did in that way. Then I will invite you all to go inside the wardrobe he describes in his novel, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is the novel I will be talking about today. And for that, I will briefly summarize the plot for those of you who haven't read the story. And then I will analyze some of the characters. As the main topic of my presentation today is about the role of women and how women are portrayed in this novel, I will only concentrate on the female characters, and I will give a special, well, I will be focusing on Lucy. And then I will finally conclude my presentation. So, well, The Chronicles of Narnia is a series of 7 fantasy novels, and it was published between 1949 and 1954. It is nowadays considered to be a classic for children's literature, and that's why it was translated into 47 different languages. So it could be read worldwide. Right, regarding the genre of fantasy, you may all know that it's a genre that has been really criticized, maybe for not being serious enough, or it has been many times compared to other genres thought to be more, I don't know, other genres that are not that stigmatized maybe, but during the 20th century with novels such as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Never-Ending Story, or The Wizard of Oz, for example, this genre started being more and more introduced into society, and this in a way made people be much more open-minded. And you may ask why? Maybe because fantasy also offers different points of view that other genres do not offer. So, but regarding the Chronicles of Narnia, it had a warm reception, especially after the film adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Right. What about the author? Well, we all know him as C.S. Lewis, but his entire name was Clive Staples Lewis, and he was born in Belfast, Ireland in 1898. What we can say about him is that he was completely fascinated by fantasy, and that is what he, in a way, shows through his writings, right? During 1916, he decided to, in a way, become part of the history of his country, and he decided to enlist the First World War. But these were really, really very hard times for him, not only because, well, you may all know that there were really hard conditions there in the trenches, as you can see in the picture there. But many of his friends were killed there, and he was also wounded, so he decided to go back to his studies. Therefore, we could say that he was a man who was always surrounded by literature studies and men. And why? Because he was, of course, part of this Inklings writers, and these are the writers we are talking about during this conference, right? This that you can see in the picture below: Charles Williams, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, or Owen Barfield, for example, right? So with that, well, he spent a lot of time with literature studies, and therefore we could say that he did not have that much time to spend with the female sex. It was actually not until he became around 50 when he finally met the woman who would become his wife, Joy Gresham. And this is important to see, so that we can understand the way in which he decided to portray women, even though he did not have that close relation with them. Right. So let's move on to the plot and characters. Right. Very briefly. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a story about 4 siblings who are escaping from the war attacks of the Second World War. And, an old professor takes them into his huge mansion. This old professor would, in a way, be playing C.S. Lewis's alter ego, the role of C.S. Lewis's alter ego. Why? Because during his life, during the Second World War, he also took in different children coming from or escaping from their countries because of the war attacks, right? The story starts when Lucy, the youngest one among the 4 siblings, the one that you can see in the picture, in the last picture, during one afternoon, they start playing hide and seek, and she is the one discovering a huge wardrobe. What happens there? That she decides to hide herself there, and then she finds a secondary world called Narnia, and that is where all the story starts. Right, as I've already mentioned, I know that there are, of course, many other male characters, but as the topic is about the role of women, I will only be concentrating on the female ones, right? So let's start with the Pevensie children. Susan Pevensie is the second oldest among the 4 siblings. She's, in a way, in charge of taking care of her younger siblings, Edmund and Lucy, and she would be representing beauty and kindness. She's also the most skeptical character that we can find in this novel, because she does not believe in this world until she's there. And once she sees that it's real, that her sister is not lying to her, she starts, helping the Narnians defeat the White Witch, and that's why she's finally crowned as Queen Susan the Gentle. What about Lucy? She's the youngest one among the 4 siblings, but she demonstrates being really, really mature, and you can ask why. Because even though she's the youngest one, and her older siblings are telling her, okay, stop lying or stop playing, this is not true, this secondary world does not exist, she still believes in herself, she knows what she has seen, and she fights for that, right? So she's definitely, for me at least, the little heroine of this story, and therefore the main protagonist as well. What it is important about her is that she's not afraid of anything. She's not afraid of talking to a huge lion who's talking to her. And that's why she's finally crowned as Queen Lucy the Valiant. And I will talk about this later. Right. Let's talk about another female character that we have in this novel, Mrs. Beaver. She's obviously a beaver, and she's portrayed in she's showing the most maternal side of a woman. Why? Because she's, she prepares lunch for children, she takes care of them, and she's definitely portraying the role of a woman during the 20th century, right? She's maybe the most traditional character that we can see in this novel. What about Jadis, the White Witch? She's showing or portraying just the opposite. She's, of course, the main antagonist. She's been described as the anti-hero, or even Satan, or at least an evil creature. Why? Because she goes against Aslan, who is the lion and the real king of the world. But she's still depicted as a really strong woman, and quite independent, and that's why she has the right to kill any treacherous Narnian. So she has this right, which makes her, in a way, special. But what is the general image that we get from these both characters? Well, on the one hand, Mrs. Beaver is described as a good character, and we have said that she's demonstrating she's portrayed as a traditional woman from the 20th century. But on the other hand, we have Jadis, who is a woman warrior. She's, from the very beginning, we know that she's a witch, so therefore she's considered to be a bad character. But she still shows this strength, and she's really, really independent, and she's portrayed as a strong woman, and that is what it is important about her. Right. So, in general, about the role of women, we have the two main young female characters, who are Susan and Lucy. And what we see is that C.S. Lewis wants to empower not only women, but also children, because he gives a lot of importance to Lucy, right? As I've already told you. And, well, what we know about the role of both male and female, well, men and women, is that back in past times, during the 20th century, women were thought to be weak, affectionate, and sensitive, while men were just the opposite. They were thought to be aggressive, they had to work outside, and they were in charge of bringing money home, right? Some scholars say that children's literature sometimes provides models for what girls and boys should be like in a given culture. And in that case, we see that C.S. Lewis portrays both male and female characters as dominant but also as dependent ones. There's not a difference because of the gender, but because of the character itself. We have, on the male side, we have strong male characters like Aslan, like Peter, the oldest brother, who are really strong, but we also have Edmund, who is representing this weakness, and he's a boy as well. In the case of the female ones, as I've mentioned, we have what it could be considered not weak, but maybe more passive character like Mrs. Beaver. And we also have JDs, or we have Susan or Lucy, who are representing this as strength. So this is what makes this special in a way. In general terms, in Narnia, what we can say is that Peter, the oldest sibling, is of course playing the role of the big boy because he is the oldest one. But this does not necessarily mean that the two girls have to be submissive, as they are not submissive at all. But still, many critics think of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to be in favor of men. On the contrary, well, I have these two pictures that demonstrate well, the role of women during both world wars, that is, well, the historical context C.S. Lewis lived in. And what we see in the first picture is a woman, is a nurse from the First World War, taking part in the First World War as a nurse, who were, of course, in charge of healing any wounded at the war. And on the second picture, we can see a woman who is actually fighting in the war. And this is exactly what we see in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. On the one hand, we have Lucy healing her brother Edmund, who has been wounded at the last battle. And on the second picture, we can see Susan, who is actually fighting. So Lucy would be representing a nurse from the First World War, while Susan would be representing a woman warrior or a soldier from the Second World War. Right. So what about Lucy? Why is she so important? Well, first of all, because the whole story starts because of her. She's the one who discovers this world. Without her, nothing would have been possible. But what it is important about her is that she's a child and that she's a girl. And Lewis decides to give all the importance to her, well, she's the main protagonist of the story, right? And it is also remarkable that she's crowned as Lucy the Valiant. What this means is that being brave at that time was something usually more common among men, but Lewis decides to portray her, a little 8-year-old girl, as the valiant one. So in general, C.S. Lewis empowers women from the very beginning, when it is Lucy the one discovering this world, until the very end when she is finally crowned as Lucy the Valiant. And as a conclusion, I would like to say that, well, Lewis shows how, or wants to teach youngest readers some moral values, like having faith in oneself, believing in what one has seen in one's thoughts, and being a good person, having some values. And that his wish to empower women is quite present through all these characters that I've been talking about today. And that was all. Thank you very much for your attention.